Welcome to We Bleed Orange and Black, the podcast for Halloween and horror lovers. My name's Jeff C. Carter, and as ever, I'll be repping the 80s.
And me, Ryan, I'm not letting those 90s go. So please journey with us for this month's Put Up Your Spooks.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another evening of thrills, chills, pills, and spills. That's right, we're still bringing you frights, though it be dead of night. In this corner, stalking silent but deadly, the Hitchhiker and the Challenger whacked out on candy corn. Are you afraid of the dark? Did you all take a nap today? Good, because this is Put Up Your Spooks!
This week's theme:
Nightshift. In trying to find a match for the infamous Tale of the Nightshift, I found an episode of The Hitchhiker called Nightshift.
Double shifts.
In this episode of The Hitchhiker, we start with a disaster recovery crew shoveling and sifting through the ruins of the factory, along with like a helpful radio broadcast explaining that one man was found dead and another miraculously alive. So he's pulled out of the rubble. We just see like an old man wearing like a ruby ring. They rush him off into the fading city light in a screaming ambulance. And as the sun goes down, a bitchy nurse, played by Margot Kidder, heads into a nursing home to begin the night shift. You know, I can't say it any better than the Hitchhiker himself does.
Jane Reynolds works the night shift in an old age home, governing her charges with rules and an iron hand. But she's going to discover that there are some rules that bend when the night shifts.
Nurse Margot makes her rounds, and she refuses to take a desperate old woman to the bathroom, and then she's lambasting the seniors in the rec room for playing board games and having intellectual debates instead of quietly rotting in front of the TV. This is grade A Nurse Ratched behavior. She even goes so far as to kick out the emotional support cat and rip a necklace away from an old lady for safekeeping. So long after that first poor woman has undoubtedly pissed herself, we see Nurse Margot waiting in her office with a stolen necklace. The door buzzes and she gussies herself up and then throws herself into the arms of her visitor, a greasy hood named Johnny. He presents the necklace and he kind of short sells her. He's like, oh yeah, this gold necklace, it's only worth about $20. Then he grabs the phone, makes a quick call to a bar that he's supposed to be at, and he says he's skipping the gig because he's found another place that will pay him more. So like right away, we get a sense of, you know, what Johnny's all about. Nurse Margot is down to pound, but they are interrupted by another insistent buzz at the door. But Johnny's got his jewelry, so he dips. The people at the door are the EMTs with the old man who miraculously survived the collapse of the factory. The hospital was full, so they're gonna dump him there. He appears to be totally unresponsive, but he's rocking that huge ruby ring. Nurse Margot tries to twist it off, but it won't budge. She leaves in a huff, and the old man opens his eyes. Nurse Margot knows that ring is going to bring Johnny back, and it does. He comes a-running. They both stand there leering over the old man, gawking at this ring, and they figure it's got to be worth 10 grand. And what I like in that scene, they do all these little things to sort of establish character, and, you know, some of them are as over the top as Nurse Margot, like kicking a cat, but when they're both like trying to figure out how this old man got this incredible like crown jewel ring, they're like, how do you think he got it? And they immediately think, oh, he must have stolen it from someone. So there's that old saying that thieves think that everyone steals. Obviously, it's not bad to steal from someone who stole it from someone else, and it's a nice little subtle line. I liked it. So there's no Vaseline on hand to get this ring off.
Surprisingly.
So Johnny goes straight to dry penetration with a switchblade. But before he can cut off the finger, an elderly resident wheels in and interrupts them. Johnny is literally so horny for this ring that he can barely walk. He like limps into the office, and Nurse Margot knows that she's finally got him on the hook. And they find some of that Vaseline and smear it on the lens. for a nice soft focus, softcore porn scene. She whips him out and he gets to suckling. Just then, the therapy cat wanders into the old man's room and he grabs it. The screams of elderly inmates bring Nurse Margot out to a grisly sight. The cat has had its throat cut. Naturally, everyone thinks Nurse Margot is responsible, so she bitch slaps one of the other old men and shrieks at everyone to get back to their rooms. When she returns to the office, ready to steal that ring and leave this life behind with Johnny, she sees that Johnny's gone. So she grabs her needle of muscle relaxant, straps the old man to his bed, and jabs him in the hand. And that does it. That does the trick.
I don't know how that helps you get a ring off a finger. I was like, what is she injecting? Hand shrinker? Bone reducer?
Bone shrinking juice. So it works. The ruby ring is finally hers, but the old man seizes her wrist. He grunts and busts out of his restraints. She hurries to the exit, but it's the night shift and all the doors are secure. This is like a high security lockdown facility. So the old man slowly approaches from the end of the dark hallway. And when Nurse Margot tries to get into the office, one of the patients cackles and jingles her stolen keys. So Margot has no recourse. She rolls a gurney out to block the old man, and she locks herself in a supply closet. And just then, Johnny's withered corpse falls out from the rack, slasher style.
That was pretty good.
At this point, bodies are dropping. She darts into another room, like an exam room. She can hear the old man shuffling around outside, wheezing his sort of gross, monotonous, deathly wheeze. And the exam room is lit up with a display of x-ray photographs. So there's like a lurid green light filling the room. There's the wheezing of the old man. She finally sees the last door. It's unlocked. There's nowhere to go. She's trapped. The old man shuffles in. She rattles the barred windows, but it's no use. She tries to juke past the old man, and he body slams her onto the gurney in slow motion, smashing her head against the dangling light, sending it swinging. He holds up his ruby ring, and the top pops off, revealing a secret blade. He slashes her throat and suckles her blood while she screams. Cut to some cop taking statements from the old people. They didn't see or hear nothing. They're all loving it. You know, they're all collaborating on their stories because they love the fact that one of their own took down Nurse Margot.
Yeah.
And we reveal the corpse of Nurse Margot in the office. She is an aged and desiccated husk. Cut to the old man, now somewhat rejuvenated, daywalking to a newsstand to buy a newspaper about his gruesome murders. The end.
I was like, oh, this nurse is just, the worst. I can't wait for her to get her comeuppance. And then Darren McGavin killed a cat. And I was like, oh no, everyone's villains. There's cats a-killins.
You know there's villains when there's pets a-killins.
Still got to root for Margot Kidder death, I guess.
It's unfortunate, that they couldn't, quote-unquote, save the cat. But, she was so abusive.
Yeah.
Beyond just neglect to these senior citizens, she really was abusive and stealing from them.
She had to go, and at least Darren McGavin didn't harm any of the old folks, so got to give him a little bit of a pass on that. Oh, well, he couldn't have because he was stealing youth and vitality.
That's right. When he drained people, he not only drank their blood, he also sort of sucked the youth out of them. From like frame 1, where you see him get pulled out of the wreckage, and they mention that like a bunch of derelicts have been taking refuge in this old burned out factory, and as they went in to pull out bodies, they pull out not only multiple bodies, but they all look really aged.
Right.
And you can see this is like the lair of a vampire that just through freak circumstance got interrupted. And then this vampire is now circulating in the hospital system, in the senior care system. I thought that was a really cool setup. And I thought they did a really good job shooting this episode. I mean, Hitchhiker always looks good, but the lighting in this one was really creepy. The sound design with like the wheezing vampire
I agree.
was really awesome.
I'm so shocked that Darren McGavin took a role with 0 lines. His only lines, which were probably ADR'd by someone else in post, were like...
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, right? Because you've got Margot Kidder and Johnny, who are horrible. They're parasites. They are preying upon helpless people, i.e. the senior citizens. And then, the ironic twist, or the comeuppance, is that there's a predator that preys on them back, right? Mm-hmm. They fall prey to a more vicious predator in a way that sort of symbolizes the victimized old people. Literally, he's one of them who takes away their abuser and sort of gets revenge for them. These weren't just like, thieves in a hospital or thieves at large. The old people were sort of made out to be very distasteful. Nurse Margot hated them. And Johnny certainly didn't think anything about he just thought they were basically unburied bodies to be robbed. And they were sort of playing with the idea of end of life and elderly people as a sort of horror unto itself. And I thought that was really interesting.
Jane Reynolds preyed on the weak and defenseless as she made her nightly rounds, until fate delivered an ancient creature to her doorstep and showed the predator what it's like to be the prey.
Well, my friends, I'm sorry, but this is going to be another long one, because this episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark, The Tale of the Nightshift, is amazing.
It's a corker.
And Jeff chose this one. For once it wasn't me, but boy am I glad we finally get to do this one. I'm going to talk about the Midnight Society a little bit. Gary finally gets the balls to ask Sam out, gets totally rebuffed, and he's like, woe is me. I just stink, and I'll never get a girl like Sam. They're like, don't worry, buddy. And Sam is up. She's telling the story that night. She's had a little time to think about it, so she says, I've been saving this one, and I think it's the right time. And she's talking about how things may appear one way on the surface, but underneath they might be something else. She's showing her geodes. Diamond's in the rough. Gary's in the rough. And so she tells her tale, the tale of the Nightshift.
Speaking of the Midnight Society, I did know that Kiki seems to have mellowed after they buried Frank in the woods.
Yeah. Although she still gets a couple of rips in there, like at the very end, she's like, ooh, it's getting hot in here.
Well, she's just being sassy. She's not,
being sassy. Not being a jerk.
Pound anyone within an inch of their life.
Frank was a bad influence. So, they're in a hospital. This takes place in a hospital on the night shift. Felix, the janitor, who himself looks kind of like a high school kid, is getting dressed down by his boss, Jack, who's like the head administrator for the hospital. He's like, you Zeeb, you signed for a water pump and you didn't get my permission?
Is this your signature, Zeebo?
I made a note. I said, did his boss call him a Zeebo?
Sure did. And he's like, you better find that water pump, Zeebo, otherwise it's curtains. And so Felix the janitor leaves to go find the water pump that he signed for, which has disappeared. Amanda, played by Emmanuelle Chriqui, who would go on to become a fairly big actress. I don't say like a megastar, but she was in tons of stuff. She's late for her candy striper night shift, so she hops on the elevator with another candy striper or nurse who's like also late, and she's like, Amanda's just describing how she goes to school and then swim practice or whatever, and then this and that and this other thing, and the only time she can take is the night shift, and she never sleeps, and she's going crazy. And I was like, do they have candy stripers on the night shift? I tried to look it up, but I couldn't really find any information.
She wasn't a candy striper. She wasn't selling cigarettes to hospital patients.
That's not what candy stripers do.
Yeah, it was.
What?
They sold like candy and cigarettes to people.
No, they didn't.
On trains and stuff and at ball games.
No,
yeah.
Candy Striper is a hospital volunteer. That's like usually a young girl. Actually, I guess it was usually an older person, like an older volunteer.
Anyway, it's nuts that Amanda is so busy with school and extracurriculars and also volunteers at the hospital overnight.
Yeah. So Amanda meets a new recruit who is a sweet young Canadian lass, but she doesn't really have time to get to know her because...
And her name?
I don't remember. I don't know what her name was.
Margot.
Margot Kidder, wow. So cut to the basement, the creepy boiler room basement. There should be some Freddies down here for sure. Felix is checking around. He's looking for the water pump. He finds a broken fragment of the crate that the water pump came in next to the furnace, and he's like, huh? But then this like hot young thing is like, Felix, come on, I want to show you something in the shadows. And I noticed that she had a t-shirt on under her dress, her spaghetti strap dress, which on the How Did This Get Made podcast, they absolutely hate, but I really like it. Maybe because I grew up in the 90s.
It also is a point towards hella 90s.
And so he's like, yeah, screw this water pump. So he heads off into the shadows, and he's like, I don't think we're supposed to be down here. But as soon as he rounds the corner, boom, monster, jump scare. And actually was kind of surprised that they revealed the monster this early, but it's like a full-on green, scaly Dracula.
Corpse green, nasty toothed, full scleral, blood red eyes, leering old man face, just creme de la creme vampire jump scare. And the reason I suggested this to kick off our We Bleed Orange and Black episode in the Put Up Your Spooks format was because this is an episode I've seen floating around in every list of scariest episodes of Are You Afraid of the Dark? And man, this is a classic. It holds up. This makeup is amazing.
The makeup I will put up against anything from your
Monsters?
beloved... What's that show called?
Monsters.
No, not Monsters. Night Creeps or whatever it was called. The comic book one we just did, where you were like, these costumes are great, and everything in Are You Afraid of the Dark sucks.
Bone Chillers.
Bone Chillers. I will put this makeup against anything in Bone Chillers. And yes, this episode, full filmmaking horror craft is on display in every scene. And not to mention, it takes place in a dark hospital at night with all these great, German expressionist shadows everywhere and stuff.
Chiaroscuro, for those of you playing along at home.
Amanda is making her rounds, and one of the nurses is like, a friend of yours is in 59. So she goes to check him, and this guy, Colin, is in the bed, and he's like, Amanda, I need sex or something. I forget what he says.
He essentially says that.
Yeah. He's not dying, and she's like, fuck you. He tries to offer her candy corn from his pockets, but she hates candy corn and Colin. She doesn't actually hate him. He's basically been pestering her for a date for months and months, and she doesn't say no because he sucks and loves candy corn out of pockets. She says no because she simply doesn't have the time.
If there is one demerit I can levy at this episode, is that this kind of plot/character did such a disservice to us growing up. Of the obnoxious boy who just pesters a girl for a date.
As we have discussed in 6DB.
Yeah, we've talked about this before, but it was a painful reminder of this constant reinforcement.
He even says at one point,
I'm not giving up till you give in.
Cut to the other nurse, and a sweet little girl beckons her into the shadows, which she follows into an empty room, and she's like, I'm gonna get you, and she pulls aside the curtain, but there's no one in there. It's like a fake-out jump scare, the false jump scare. But then from behind her, ba-boom! Crazy monster. Cut back to... This is a very cutty episode. They're cutting back and forth from character to character constantly.
And there's a lot of excess characters, background characters, supporting cast, that in a weird way, by swelling the cast, it ups the danger and the stakes, because you're like, some of these people are expendable. Shit could go down.
A lot of red shirts. Back with Colin. He's, still pursuing her for a date when this little kid in a wheelchair flies by, interrupts them. The new girl, Margot, grabs the wheelchair, and he's like, let's go to the morgue. I want to see some corpses. And she's like, this little scamp. She wheels him away. Amanda goes off, leaves Colin behind to do her rounds again, and the other nurse that she met in the elevator startles her. She's all wan and zombie-like. Then Colin finds Amanda again, later in the night, to tell her that the wheelchair kid, hasn't come back to the room that they share. So they go off to find the wheelchair kid. The head nurse, Nurse Hansen, pops out of some room somewhere, and Colin drags Amanda into this closet. He's still eating candy corn, and she's like, fuck, what is wrong with you? How can you eat this? It's just then that they step on a bunch of empty, shredded blood bags on the ground of the supply closet, and Colin is like, why do they keep him in here? Amanda says they don't. So she goes to show Nurse Hansen these blood bags, and she's like, we gotta, I think, maybe get security down here or something. And Nurse Hansen is wan and zombie-like. She says, I'll do that. And she picks up the phone. Amanda walks away, and Nurse Hansen puts down the phone. So there's something fishy going on here besides monster attacks. I think it's probably clear that all these people have bite marks on their necks, too.
It's around that time they do the first close-up on the neck, I believe.
Gross!
Cullen is like, you know what? Hi, Amanda. I'm back again. And I think I maybe know where that kid went. So they head to the morgue because he remembers that the kid run in to see the morgue. And there's like a dead body under a sheet on a table. And fucking Cullen is like, whoa, is that a body? I gotta check this out. Ain't never seen no bodies before. So he pulls the sheet off like a candy corn munching psychopath.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to jump in right here and say it is the rare episode of a children's show that will even allude to a morgue,
Yeah.
let alone follow up that thread, actually go to a morgue, and then actually show you a child's dead body on a slab. Like, this episode gives no fucks.
Yeah, they went there. So he pulls the sheet off the body, and it's Felix, the janitor. And Amanda is freaked out because she just saw him when she got to work, and he was totally fine. So they leave the room, of course. At least Cullen... So they put the sheet back on, and they leave the room. And as soon as they leave, the sheet rises, and Felix sits up off the table. Horror movie style.
That would have freaked my shit out as a kid. Did you see this growing up?
I did, yeah.
And?
Of course. Well, shit, man. It must have freaked me out, yeah. It's one of those things. It's like Star Wars. I don't remember the first time I saw it, it was so long ago. I just remember loving Felix as a character because he's really fantastic in this. The actor is doing a great job, and the character is kind of cool and crazy. So that's all I really remember.
You've always been partial to Zeebs.
And Felix has bite marks and fangs. So we're zeboing in on this.
A new development. One of these drained people now has fangs.
But he's not as pale and wan. He's not like a zombie like the others. He's very clear-eyed.
It's a sinister look in his eye and a sinister smile.
So Amanda goes to make a phone call, and the phone is dead. And Colin goes,
Just like old Felix.
her friend.
Her recently murdered friend.
So they head to the stairwell to escape the hospital, I guess. But Felix is down at the bottom of the stairs.
Fright Night style.
So they run, Dutch angle. Felix comes out of the stairwell door, and he's like, I'm cool, hip vampire. And he tries to bite Amanda. And she's like, Felix, no. And he's like, I can't do it. So he gets control of his bloodlust, and he kind of like falls over to the corner. And he's like, the problem was I was the first, and the creature drank too much. I'm gonna bite you. And in a tour de force performance, he explains the whole situation about how this vampire,
how it shipped itself to the hospital in the water tank crate, which reminded me of The Strain on FX.
They're always shipping themselves in crates. I guess that's just a vampire thing. They go with Felix to the basement, and he shows them the coffin and explains that it's a vampire and they have to destroy the coffin. But just then, the new girl, Margot, shows up, and she's like, Felix is wrong.
Of course a vampire needs its coffin, but it also needs blood. People have it all wrong. Vampires only need to feed about every 50 years or so.
Second demerit. Why go out of their way to specify that a vampire only needs to feed once every 50 years?
Well, I suppose it's because if they were feeding all the time and this kind of thing was happening all the time, people would know about it.
Which is why a clever vampire would sneak into a hospital where there's blood bags and patients. If you can feed off people without turning them, then feed every night.
Oh, you don't have a problem with the fact that they have to feed every 50 years. You have a problem with the fact that she explains it?
No, I have a problem with a monster that only does something bad twice a century. When your average human criminal outpaces this vampire exponentially, like in the 100 years where this vampire has fed twice, your most basic, boring criminals have done 1 trillion times more damage to society.
I guess
like there's
so,
nothing
but
scary about a vampire that feeds once every 50 years.
Well, I think you'd be scared if you were staring down the barrel of that vampire's fangs. I don't think it diminishes its terror or its criminality. It's still right now drinking the blood of everyone in this hospital.
It's draining them slightly so that it can create a safe place for it to hang out for the next 50 years.
Oh, no. It's not going to hang out there for 50 years. It's going to drink what it needs tonight, and then it'll be sated for the next 50 years, and it won't have to bother hunting.
Yeah, a monster that doesn't bother people for 5 decades at a time. I don't know. It's just...
Well, I mean, Pennywise only bothers people every 30 years. He's still a monster. He's still killing and eating people and drinking their blood. I don't get the point.
But it's like,
get the problem.
Let's compare that vampire to drunk drivers.
I guess. I
Body
don't know.
count,
I
drunk
think,
drivers, 50,000.
I think it's an arbitrary point.
Body count, vampire, 1. The vampires that have been established that we just assume when we see that fucking awesome gnarly vampire are drinking every night. And so it's like, oh shit, there's a vampire. This is a problem. We're all in danger. But if Amanda's schedule had been such that she had showed up the day after, like, yeah, she would have been fine. She could have lived another 50 years with no threat.
Yeah, but that doesn't matter because her schedule wasn't such, and she was there. That's all that matters.
I'm just saying, like...
Somebody else would have been there.
I'm just saying, a monster that is harmless for 49.9 years. I don't know, man.
Yeah, well...
It's you're diminishing a vampire by making it only feed once every 50 years. Like, what's the point?
Yeah, well, you do you. And so, as she's explaining, all of this, she morphs into the big green vampire. It was Margot all along.
Hold on, I've got an idea. It's a werewolf, but he only changes once every 50 years.
Well, if he's ripping out your innards, it's going to be pretty scary.
Boo.
So they run away from the vampire, leaving Felix to his fate because the vampire is pissed that Felix has told them all of this. They make a plan. Colin is like, I will lure the vampire away while you go and drag the coffin into the furnace. So he's finally like not being a total dick for once. And she's like, well, I can't lift that heavy coffin, so I'll lure the vampire away and you put the coffin in the furnace. And then she takes a candy corn, signifying a character arc. Amanda's like running around. She's just running into zombies everywhere. They're spooking her at every turn. The kid comes out in his wheelchair and he's like, hi, Amanda. I got to see the morgue. For real. Because he died. She runs into the elevator. The vampire in Margot form spooks her at the elevator door. She gets away, makes it to the roof. Down in the basement, Colin grabs the coffin, but Felix is now fully vampirized, so he grabs Colin, slams him up against the wall. He's like trying to drink his blood. The vampire is stalking Amanda on the roof, and he even says like, I don't like to work this hard for my food. He's over it. He just wants to finish eating and then go fucking sleep for 50 years. Felix is like this close to biting Colin, but Colin appeals to Felix's admiration and affection for Amanda by saying like, don't, Amanda, she's in danger, you gotta help me. And Felix is like, my insides. So he helps Colin to drag the coffin. The vampire gets Amanda on the roof, dangles her over the edge, and says,
I shall drop you and then lick up what's left.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah,
that
you can
was
picture it.
Awesome.
And then he goes, no, the old ways are best. He pulls her back over the edge. Down in the basement, Felix and Colin successfully get the coffin into the furnace. Up on the roof, the vampire is this close to biting Amanda, and his head bursts into flames. He screams and goes over the edge of the roof and lands in a burning heap down below. Back in the hospital, all the inpatients and employees are back to normal.
Lost Boy rules.
They're unvampirized. Amanda's like, they don't even remember. And then Felix goes, I remember. Thanks. Gives her a big thumbs up and then heads back into the basement. Amanda reaches into Colin's pocket, pulls out a lint-encrusted candy corn, and says,
I'll have to check my schedule, but I'm pretty sure I can squeeze you in.
when in fact the proper reaction should be like it's a very cutesy like kids show ending where all wraps up and everyone's fine. It never bothered me before until I decided to analyze the episode for this episode, and I was like, fuck, her trauma should be such that she is a gibbering mess on the ground covered in her own pee.
Yeah, they go so hard in the horror it doesn't make sense to tone shift back to kids show at the end.
And then cut back out to the Midnight Society where Sam is like, you know, I realized I was so busy that I wasn't giving Candy Corn a chance. And he's like, great.
He's like, I am the human equivalent of
candy corn?
Sweaty old candy corn that's been in a hospital gown.
Basically, yeah. He's like, let's go. Let's get out of here. Let's take in a picture show. And she's like, no, let's sit by the fire. The end.
What's amazing about that Midnight Society outro is there's a relationship change in the Midnight Society. So status quo is broken. And they don't extinguish the fire.
They do not? Yeah, well, not yet at least. Well, they're because their own fire is kindling within them.
Yeah, so very interesting episode. I have in my notes, peak Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Mm-hmm.
Is it all downhill from here? Is there anything else that brings the heat, like the Tale of the Night Shift?
No.
All right, we're strictly goosebumps after this.
You want some candy corn?
Ratings. Time to Shrew for Hitchhiker, I'd say 3 minutes.
If you're not counting Hitchhiker monologue, it's like 30 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, she's scowling at those two cool punk rockers with the boombox on their shoulder, which I mention for 80s cred. Oh, yeah, it's coming. Kryptonite for Night Shift.
It's there, I think, when he explains about the coffin and destroying it, but it's very late in the episode.
So I'm not sure it qualifies as the classic Kryptonite drop.
Right.
Body count or Night Shift,
If we're being strict about it, it's 3, including Kat.
Johnny and Margot.
Yeah.
Body count for Tale of the Night Shift.
Well, it's a lot, but they all get revived at the end. So just one, the vampire.
Scare factor for Night Shift, I'd say high. Really good, creepy imagery, thick atmosphere. That sequence at the end when the vampire slams her head through the lamp and murders her in slow motion, definitely scary. Scare factor for Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Way high.
Highest yet, perhaps?
Not even like grading on a kid's curve.
No, I mean, this is an all-timer. Gross factor for Night Shift.
I think it was I think McGavin's makeup was kind of gross.
He was sort of aged, so he had like thick layers of withered latex. Full close-up on that dead cat, man. Gross factor for Are You Afraid of the Dark?
I still find the lick up what's rest pretty gross because I can picture it in my head whenever he says it. Just licking a bloody, goopy pile of goo.
What the factor for Hitchhiker? None. It all made clear sense. I mean, it's a type of vampire we don't see very often, but we know it's a vampire. It reads. What the factor for Are You Afraid of the Dark?
I would say there is none, really.
Yeah, story-wise, bang on, and they do a great job of explaining everything, even with a huge cast of characters. Theme of Night Shift.
I would say brilliant for both.
High for both. Totally 80s. We've got punks with a boombox, and that's it. I mean, Margot Kidder, maybe.
Once she gets into the hospital, it's fairly 50s, 60s, because she's got that sort of classic nurse's uniform and stuff.
Hella 90s?
Yeah, I think just that dress, just the spaghetti strap dress with the t-shirt underneath.
Okay, well, by the numbers... Winner, Hitchhiker, Night Shift.
Oh.
Sorry, man. Maybe if that vampire fed more than every 50 years.
Uh-huh.
No, the old-fashioned way is best.
It's natural to fear hospitals, but I realized as I grew up that I also had a fear of the elderly and nursing homes and things like that. So that, is behind one of the reasons why I chose to go and volunteer at a nursing home. This is when I was working a few part-time jobs, and I had these like dead spots in the middle of my schedule where I didn't have enough time to go home and then turn around and come back to work, but I did have time to do something for an hour or two here and there. And it just so happened between my two jobs there was a nursing home, and this was specifically a nursing home that had a facility for people with dementia and Alzheimer's. And when I went through the training, they told me that you're not supposed to pull out your phone because a lot of these people on the Alzheimer's ward, they don't know what smartphones are. Furthermore, we try to keep them comfortable by letting them think that it's the 50s or the 40s or the 30s. So in the hallway, there were like dress forms with 40s style dresses or World War II uniforms. And the music they played was all golden oldies, not Leonard Skinner. I'm talking like big band music.
Wow. So this episode was accurate.
It touched a nerve. So I got to hang out with some of the residents there, and they were all like super cool. I guess I was seeing them on good days. And you could tell that some people had memory problems, but at the end of the day, they're just bored.
Yeah.
And they were really open and fun to talk to, fun to hang out, play board games with, and stuff like that. And one of the things that kind of disturbed me, because I get up in my head as an overthinker / fiction writer, this floor of the old folks' home was password protected. So to keep them from getting in the elevator and going down and wandering out, the password was the current year. And if you knew what year it was, you could get out of there.
Oh
If
my
you didn't
God.
know what year it was, you'd never think to put it in. And that was sort of existentially fucked with me.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy.
The fact that everyone working there had iPhones in their pockets or smartphones in their pockets, but they weren't taking them out. And so the people who lived on this floor had no idea that everyone had like space age technology hidden on their person. It was so awkward.
Wow. You know, and I always wanted to talk to my grandmother about how the world had changed. I did ask her one time, like, what do you think about self-driving cars? And she was like, but not for me, or something. Which at this point, I'm right there with you.
If I want to kind of drag this back towards the horror umbrella, imagine either of these vampires, living through these incredibly tumultuous times.
Epochs.
Yeah, if you go back in history a couple hundred years, there are periods of stability where very little changes. Maybe this king or that king, but you could set yourself up and live a pretty stable life without a lot of sweeping change. And then in the 20th century, like just the pace of change is so breakneck. And, this is a common theme that is explored in our paranormal fiction. But it is funny to think that both the vampires in our Nightshift episodes would have seen such incredible change.
Yeah. I wonder if you'd be like, oh God, it's too confusing, or if you'd be like, oh, finally, something's happening.
I could
suppose it
see
depends on your personality.
wanting to get buried for 100 years at a time, ugh, I'm just going to wait this out, this king sucks, or, this war is boring. But if there's something new every day, it stimulates you, right?
Yeah.
There's always something new to learn, and you adapt to things. I feel like you'd want to be an immortal at a time of great change.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the only reason I would want to live, to have an extended life, is just to see what happens, just to see what changes. Because, I imagine as long as we don't nuke ourselves, the future will be fascinating. But I know that I'll never see it, and that makes me really bummed.
Or you can look backwards and think, I am living at a time of unprecedented change, and it is psychedelic.
Well, yeah. I mean, forget about our grandparents. Even in yours and my own lifetimes, which are relatively short, we've seen some massive changes.
Yeah, Ryan's got full-blown scurvy.
Yeah.
I had leprosy, rickets.
But I only take vitamin C every 50 years, so I can't change now.
You feed on a lemon like a vampire.
Isn't this fruit grove just such like a candy store? Oh, God, that was the worst sentence I've ever spoken.
Rerun for your life! So that was our first Put Up Your Spooks style We Bleed Orange and Black. Please tell a spooky friend, rate and subscribe on iTunes, or follow and comment on Instagram and Twitter at webobpodcast and webobpod@gmail.com.
Jeff, I have been bleeding black lately. Do you think that's an issue?
No.
All right. Well, that comforts me.
You can find me at jeffccarter.com and pick up my collection, We Bleed Orange and Black, 31 fun-sized tales for Halloween, on Amazon for 99 cents.
Ryan here. I don't really have anything for you to check me out on, but I'll work on it, and I'll get back to you.
Well, until next time, stay spooktacular.